Please, I'm bleeding, I screamed, clutching my pregnant stomach. But my husband and his mother just watched. They shoved me out into the lashing rain, locked the solid brass door, and left me to die on the cold steps. They thought they were erasing their problem. They had no idea they had just declared war. The sound wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Click. The heavy thud of the solid brass deadbolt sliding home was the sound of my life shattering, an abrupt, final punctuation mark on a fairy tale that had always been written in invisible ink. The rain, which had been a gentle, cleansing drizzle moments ago, now lashed down in sheets, instantly soaking the thin silk of my nightgown and plastering my hair to my face. I stood paralyzed on the freezing marble steps, the slick stone biting through my bare feet. Every muscle in my body screamed, a primal warning that was drowned out only by the ragged, terrified gasps I pulled into my lungs. My hand was pressed firmly against the bulge of my pregnant stomach, the silk sticky and dark with warmth that should not have been there. Don't look down, Elena. Just breathe. They said they loved me. They said I was the light of the Adonis house. The perfect wife. The perfect future mother. But in that moment, as the icy torrent mixed with the hot, useless tears streaming down my face, I knew the truth. I was merely refused. Thrown out into the storm, I forced my eyes up to the tall, paned windows of the living room. A haven of golden warmth just 10 feet away. The light spilled out onto the porch, illuminating the dark pools forming around my feet. Yet it felt a million miles distant, and then I saw them. Thomas, my perfect, successful husband, stood silhouetted against the fireplace glow. His Armani suit was impeccable. His jaw set not in concern, but in icy, meticulous satisfaction. Beside him, Diane, his mother, the architect of this slow, subtle torture, wore her signature pearl necklace and a look of triumphant serenity. They didn't look out at the storm, they looked at each other. Slowly, deliberately, Thomas lifted a crystal glass of amber liquid. Diane mirrored his movement, her thin lips curving into a precise, triumphant smile that didn't reach her eyes. They didn't need words. The gesture was clear. It was a silent toast, a celebration of their victory, held over the body of the woman they had just left bleeding and vulnerable on their doorstep. The realization hit me with the force of the slamming door. They hadn't just intended to hurt me, they intended to erase me. I slid down onto the cold steps, the shock finally overriding the pain, and curled into a tight ball, shielding the child who was already paying the price for my naive quest for perfection. The house, my home for 2 years, loomed behind the glass, impervious and unfeeling, a monument to the lie that had swallowed my life whole. I tried to call out Thomas's name, but the sound was choked off by a guttural, desperate sob. My vision swam. The last thing I saw before the darkness pulled me under was the warm, indifferent glow of the chandelier inside, and the distant, echoing clang of celebration. The darkness was a velvet blanket, softer than the marble steps, pulling me away from the downpour. When I opened my mind, I found myself adrift. Not in the present storm, but floating back through time, to when the golden glow of the Adonis manor felt like safety, not a mockery. I remember the day I accepted Thomas Adonis's proposal. It wasn't fireworks or grand romantic gestures, it was the sheer, breathtaking stability he represented. Thomas, the successful venture capital CEO, sharp, restrained, impeccably tailored, was the embodiment of the secure life I had always craved, a stark contrast to the chaotic, transient existence of my early years. Our house in Greenwich was not merely large, it was a museum of curated perfection. Every crystal glass, every silk throw, every imported marble slab, was chosen not for comfort, but for effect. I was the centerpiece, the exotic girl integrated into their American tableau, required to look beautiful and maintain a discreet silence while Thomas finalized billion-dollar deals in his study. For 2 years I played the part of the perfect wife flawlessly. I learned to order the right wines, host the right charity functions, and smile on cue. The conductor of this polished symphony was Diane. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her criticisms were surgical, wrapped in layers of maternal concern and polished politeness. She would say, inspecting my plate at a dinner party, her hand resting delicately on my shoulder, "That veal is far too rich for a public figure's wife. Remember your silhouette. We have the Hamilton Gala next month. Thomas needs you radiant, not robust." Or, regarding my heritage, which was often a quiet source of pride, she would dismiss it with a flick of her hand. "Your family history is charmingly rugged, Elena. But here, we deal in established legacies. Make sure your public statements are always neutral. No need to bring attention to that unpleasantness." She controlled the schedule, the staff, the color of the napkins, and slowly, insidiously, she began to control me. I accepted it. I mistook control for care, and the rigid schedule for structure. I genuinely believed that this careful, golden prison was the definition of success, the safety net I had yearned for since childhood. Until the moment I missed my cycle. I had waited 3 weeks to tell Thomas. Timing it for the evening, he closed a massive deal. A triumphant night when the champagne flowed freely, and his chest seemed permanently puffed with pride. I had dreamt of this moment. The joy, the embrace, the promise of a true family. "I'm pregnant," I whispered, resting my hand on his arm as he admired the city skyline from our bedroom window. The warmth that had illuminated his face seconds before extinguished instantly. The perfect CEO smile was replaced by a twitch of calculation, a cold, analytical frown. "A baby now, Elena?" he said, pulling away slightly. His voice held no joy, only irritation. "That wasn't ideal timing. Adonis Capital is on the verge of a massive global expansion. I need you available for global travel, not nesting here for 9 months." The first crack had appeared, but the true devastation came from Diane. When I told her the news the next day, her composure shattered. She didn't even pretend to offer congratulations. "You fool," she hissed, her blue eyes turning to chips of ice. She grabbed a porcelain figurine off the mantelpiece and gripped it so tightly her knuckles whitened. "A child will ruin everything. It will distract Thomas, and God knows what kind of complications your peasant blood will introduce. Thomas's focus, his career, the firm it requires absolute, single-minded dedication. This thing you've created will be a financial and social anchor." From that day forward, the gilded cage became a hostile territory. Thomas grew distant, his late nights becoming the norm, his affection replaced by cold indifference. Diane dropped all pretense of motherly care, viewing me with unconcealed contempt, her whispers turning into veiled threats. I realized, with a sickening lurch of dread, that I hadn't secured my place in the Adonis kingdom. I had merely accelerated my expiration date. They hadn't wanted a wife or a mother. They had wanted an accessory, and accessories are replaced the moment they clash with the season's new collection. The silence of the house became a heavy cloak, woven with suspicion and the cloying scent of Diane's victorious perfume. I walked through the gilded rooms, a ghost in my own life, constantly listening for the muffled sound of a phone call, the scraping of a chair in Thomas's locked study, or the soft, cruel sigh of his mother. Thomas's late nights grew longer, stretching past midnight, then 2 a.m. When he did return, he moved with the precision of a trained operative, showering in the guest bath, and dressing silently while feigning sleep. The standard explanations, market volatility, unforeseen mergers, client crisis, felt flimsy, failing to cover the deep, cold distance growing between us. I was pregnant, tired, and increasingly desperate for proof of what my instincts were screaming. One morning, while sorting laundry, I found the first tangible clue. A small, personalized leather USB drive, clipped to the lining of his gym bag. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my old laptop, the device I rarely used, hiding its screen in the shadows of the master closet. It wasn't pornography or sweet text to a mistress. What I found was far worse. A labyrinth of financial and legal manipulation that made the idea of a simple affair seem like a merciful escape. The drive contained files categorized with military efficiency, trust reorg, Rostova assessment, and legal contingency, marital exit. The Rostova assessment file, dated 2 weeks after I announced the pregnancy, was a horrifying, meticulous catalog of every perceived flaw: my instability due to my childhood, my reliance on Thomas's wealth, my emotional volatility, and worst of all, a psychiatric referral letter forged, complete with a doctor's signature suggesting I was experiencing severe prenatal psychosis, making me an unfit mother. They weren't planning a divorce. They were planning an annihilation. They intended to declare me mentally unstable, seize the child immediately upon birth, and use the fabricated evidence to ensure I lost all legal standing, effectively disappearing me from their perfect narrative, without a single financial settlement or stain on Thomas's reputation. The final piece of the puzzle, a file marked "Second Phone," contained an encrypted PDF. I managed to crack the simple password "Adonis Life" and saw it. A string of text messages exchanged between Thomas and Diane, not about a mistress, but about the allocation of large, unauthorized wire transfers to offshore accounts and complex negotiations with a law firm specializing in asset protection and non-disclosure agreements concerning corporate fraud. The mistress was merely a smokescreen. The real crime was financial, and the pregnancy was the unexpected complication they needed to surgically remove. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving a cold, brittle shell. It wasn't the betrayal that broke me. It was the meticulous calculation, the sheer, cold-blooded cruelty of their preparation. They had plotted my downfall while sharing the same bed, drinking celebratory champagne over dinner, and gently asking about the baby's health. I waited. I put the USB back exactly where I found it and tried to breathe normally, spending the day preparing the stage for the final act of my marriage. Thomas came home late that evening, smelling of expensive whiskey and a strange, metallic perfume that wasn't mine. He was buoyant, congratulating himself on a successful trip to Geneva. I met him in the study, where the air was thick with the scent of leather and old money. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in my hands. He sighed, already irritated. "Now, Elena? I'm exhausted. Can't this wait until morning?" "It's probably about the nursery colors. It's about the legal contingency file." I cut in, watching his face. The color vanished instantly. The buoyancy dropped away, revealing the stone mask beneath. For the first time, I saw the true Thomas Adonis, the predator stripped bare of the Armani facade. "You went through my things?" he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "I found your second phone," I confirmed. "I saw the assessment, the forged documents, the plan to have me institutionalized. Tell me, Thomas, which part of this lie did you actually enjoy?" He didn't deny it. He walked to the bar, poured himself a bourbon, and looked at me over the rim of the glass with sheer, contemptuous pity. "Enjoy? Elena? You were a transaction," he stated simply, taking a slow sip. "You were exactly what Diane and I needed for 3 years. Young, presentable, vaguely exotic, the perfect optics for a CEO launching a global fund. The fact that you came with a small, accessible trust fund was an added bonus for the initial seed money." I braced my hand against the desk. "You married me for money and decoration?" "Of course," he scoffed. "Did you actually think I loved you? That this," he waved dismissively at the gilded room, "was real? It was a stage set. But you became difficult. The pregnancy was the final straw. You were going to be a liability, Elena. The firm, the money, the life we built, it all requires stability. And you were introducing an unacceptable element of risk. Diane was right. As always, you needed to be neutralized, quietly and efficiently." The words hit me harder than any physical blow. They confirmed every insidious doubt Diane had planted. I was nothing. A disposable resource. My mind raced, scrambling for a lifeline. I had one number left, one name I had buried deep in my past, ashamed of the connection, ashamed of the life I had left behind to chase this glittering deception. Alex. I'm leaving, I said, turning for the door, clutching my stomach. Thomas laughed. A dry, cruel sound. Go where? Your credit cards are already frozen. Your passport is locked in the safe. You have nowhere to go, Elena. You're cut off. By tomorrow, our lawyers will have a temporary restraining order in place. You have no legal rights to anything here, including the child, given the circumstances. I stumbled into the hallway, pulling my old cracked phone from the pocket of my housecoat, ignoring the legal threat. Ignoring the throbbing pain that was beginning to curl across my lower abdomen, I dialed the only number I knew would recognize the desperation in my silence. The line rang 4 times, 5, 6, then the impersonal, automated greeting. The user you are trying to reach is unavailable. Please leave a message. It was a generic, cold female voice. Alexa's familiar, deep baritone was nowhere to be heard. I pressed the phone against my ear, listening to the dead silence after the beep. I couldn't speak, my throat seized, strangled by terror and the cold realization that my one true sanctuary had been unavailable. Rejecting my desperate plea, I hung up, the tears finally starting to fall, heavy and useless. I was utterly alone, trapped in the center of the perfect, murderous lie. I looked back at the study door, knowing what was coming next. Knowing that Thomas would not let me walk away quietly now that the truth was out. The darkness of the inevitable began to gather around the edges of the golden light. The door didn't swing open. It was kicked open. Thomas stood there, no longer the composed, controlled CEO, but a man completely unraveled, his face mottled with dark, dangerous fury. He hadn't bothered to put down his bourbon glass. You think calling some old flame changes anything? He spat, referencing my panicked, futile attempt to reach Alex. His voice was a low snarl, laced with the metallic tang of rage. You are my liability, Elena, and liabilities are contained. He moved too fast for me to react, crossing the oriental rug in 3 long, predatory strides. His hand clamped onto my arm, the sudden, brutal pressure crushing the delicate flesh above my elbow. The pain was immediate, sharp, and overwhelming, but the real terror was the coldness of his grip. Let go of me, Thomas, I demanded, my voice weak and trembling. He ignored me, hauling me deeper into the house, towards the main staircase. You are going back to the bedroom. You will stay there. We will manage this disappearance cleanly. I twisted, struggling against him with everything I had. The movement was clumsy, hindered by my pregnancy, and the sudden, desperate wrench triggered an agonizing stab in my lower abdomen. I gasped, doubling over, the pain searing through me. My God, stop, I'm bleeding, I choked out, clutching myself, desperate to make him see the reality of what he was doing. He paused, his eyes flickering down to my midsection, not with sympathy or alarm, but with pure, cold annoyance like a man finding a stain on his expensive suit. Stop being dramatic, that's just stress, he dismissed, trying to pull me forward again. Ignoring my whimper, this time, driven by animal panic for the child I knew I was losing, I fought back with all the primal strength the situation afforded. I planted my feet and shoved him, aiming for his chest. It wasn't enough to hurt him, but it broke his grip. He stumbled back, cursing under his breath, as the bourbon in his glass splashed violently onto the pristine antique wallpaper. The sight of the ruined decor seemed to inflame him more than my resistance. He didn't hesitate. He raised his hand and shoved me away with brutal, targeted force. The impact sent me flying backward. My shoulder hit the sharp, unforgiving edge of the marble console table, and I crumpled instantly to the hardwood floor. The world tilting and blurring into a sickening spiral of brown and beige. The pain in my abdomen was no longer a stab. It was a tearing, relentless fire, a tidal wave of agony. I looked down through the haze, and the warm, dark stain on my nightgown, previously just a smudge, had blossomed, spreading rapidly across the silk. Call an ambulance, Thomas, please, I need a doctor now. I pleaded, the panic turning my voice into a thin, broken screech. Before Thomas could respond, Diane emerged silently from the kitchen, dressed in her evening robe, holding a small silver ice bucket. She surveyed the scene, Thomas breathing heavily, me curled on the floor, bleeding with the detached assessment of a critic viewing a disappointing performance. Oh, for heaven's sake, Elena, stop your dramatics, she said, sounding utterly bored, as if I had merely spilled coffee on the rug. I stretched out a shaking hand towards the nearby phone table. The baby. Diane moved with chilling efficiency. She snatched the telephone receiver. Just before my fingers brushed the sleek surface of the table. There will be no medical records, Diane stated, her voice flat and decisive. You will not use a potential tragedy to create evidence against Thomas. You will not ruin his future with your weakness. She dropped the receiver back onto its cradle, her eyes drilling into me with pure, unadulterated contempt. Get up. Get out, Thomas commanded, regaining his composure and pointing towards the front door, already glistening with the rain outside. We are done with this theatrical performance. I can't move. I wept, the words thick with tears and fear. I am bleeding. If you throw me out, I will lose this child. You will be a murderer. Diane took a deliberate step closer, leaning down until her expensive, cloying perfume choked me. We will call it a miscarriage of convenience, dear. And tomorrow, we will arrange for your temporary confinement under emergency psychiatric evaluation. But that process starts outside. Then came the final, visceral assault. Thomas grabbed my legs and dragged me across the smooth wood floor, the friction burning my skin. I screamed, but the thick walls of the perfect, silent house. The front door burst inward, and the sudden blast of freezing air and lashing rain hit me like a physical blow. Thomas exerted one last, brutal effort, shoving me through the threshold. I tumbled out onto the wet, icy marble of the portico, landing hard. I instinctively curled into a tight ball, shielding the child who was already paying the price for my naive mistakes. I heard the decisive sound of the heavy door slamming shut behind me. The cold was immediate, brutal. I heard the receding sounds of their footsteps inside. The silence of their victory, more chilling than a scream. The golden light of the living room, which had promised warmth, seemed only to mock the darkness gathering over me. A wave of dizziness washed over me, a dark current pulling me down. I focused every fiber of my being, every desperate maternal instinct, on the small life I still gripped within me. No, not yet. You have to survive this. For her, the marble was freezing, the relentless pain surging, demanding my attention. I tried to hold on to consciousness, to scream for help, but the golden glow of the chandelier receded, shrinking into a distant, indifferent star. The darkness was heavy, sweet, and promising peace. It reached for me, pulling me away from the downpour. As my grip slackened, the last conscious thought I had wasn't of hatred or revenge, but a silent, agonizing prayer to the universe. Someone, anyone. Don't let them win. And then, nothing. Only the deafening sound of the storm, washing away the evidence. The darkness didn't last long enough to be restful. It was ripped away by a sound that resonated deep in my bones. A fierce, guttural Russian oath swallowed by the roar of the storm. Then, the cold was gone, replaced by a dense, intoxicating warmth. The scent of expensive leather and something fiercely masculine wood smoke and clean rain. I felt myself lifted. Not gently, but with powerful, controlled force, cradled against a solid chest. Elena, open your eyes. That voice, deep, rough, vibrating with barely contained violence. It was Alex Vulov, my estranged guardian, the man I had foolishly pushed away in pursuit of the clean, safe illusion of Thomas Adonis. My unanswered, desperate prayer had been heard. I tried to whisper his name, but only a wet rattle escaped my lips. Don't talk. Hold on. The world became a series of sickening lurches and blurs. The slam of a heavy car door. The siren sound of the rain replaced by the rhythmic thump of windshield wipers. The blinding flash of streetlights. Alex drove with terrifying speed and precision. His free hand, the other, was pressed firmly against my blood-soaked stomach, gripping the steering wheel. I heard the message, he murmured, his voice tight. The silence was enough. I had a tracker on your phone's location since the moment you tried to contact me months ago. Thank God. Guilt and relief mingled. But the pain quickly overshadowed everything. I focused on his solid presence, breathing in the scent of safety he exuded. I knew, even as the world spiraled away again, that I was no longer alone. The next hours were a mosaic of hushed voices, antiseptic smells, and sharp, necessary agony. I wasn't in a standard hospital. This was a place of quiet luxury and intense efficiency, an operating theater disguised as a minimalist art gallery. I vaguely remember the rush of white coats, the insertion of needles, and the cool, reassuring pressure of Alex's hand on my wrist, never leaving. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at the attending doctor, his face rigid, demanding answers in clipped, non-negotiable English. When the haze finally cleared, I was resting in a massive, high-tech bed, the sheets crisp and cool. The incessant tearing pain had receded into a dull, manageable ache. Alex was sitting beside me, still wearing his storm-drenched overcoat, looking like a dark angel waiting on judgment. The baby. I rasped, my throat raw. He leaned forward, his amber eyes intense. She is stable. They stabilized the bleeding and contained the abruption. It was close, Elena. Too close. If I had been 5 minutes later, you would both be gone. A wave of devastating relief washed over me, immediately followed by the resurgence of bitter, righteous anger. Thomas and Diane had been willing to murder her and me to protect their financial secrets. Diane, the word was venomous on my tongue. She took the phone. She wouldn't call for help. Alexei nodded slowly. He didn't need the details. He understood the caliber of cruelty involved. They are monsters, Elena. I lay there for a long time, staring at the perfectly white ceiling, processing the scale of the destruction. I had pursued a fairy tale, and nearly paid for it with my child's life. The perfect life was a myth, a facade used to mask depravity. When the doctor, a meticulous woman with kind eyes and the demeanor of a high-ranking military officer, came in to check on me, she confirmed the details with clinical accuracy. You've suffered severe trauma and distress, Elena. Your body is strong, but the abuse was systematic and severe. The premature labor was triggered by the final physical assault. You need absolute rest, but your baby is fighting hard. She is a warrior. A warrior. That word struck me. After the doctor left, Alex pulled a chair closer. He didn't offer comfort. He offered truth. Listen to me, Elena. Thomas Adonis and Diane are not just unpleasant people. They are deeply entrenched, powerful operators. Your discovery of the forged documents was only the tip of an iceberg. They have legal teams, security assets, and deep political ties. If you had gone to the police bleeding tonight, they would have activated the psychiatric referral within hours and buried you in paperwork, claiming the injuries were self-inflicted during a psychotic break. He was outlining the truth I had subconsciously known. I was a casualty of war, not a wronged wife. You tried to contact me months ago. When the pressure began, Alex continued, his tone matter of fact. I was dealing with a complicated situation in Budapest, but I left a persistent tracker on your phone, expecting this outcome. I didn't answer the phone tonight because my immediate response was already action. I knew silence meant violence. He reached into his inner pocket and placed a small, polished card on the bedside table. Vulov Solutions, International Security and Risk Mitigation, I can protect you, he said, looking straight into my eyes. I have the resources, the infrastructure, and the loyalty you need. I can make them disappear from your life forever. But you cannot fight them alone, and you cannot fight them using their rules. You have to step entirely outside the law they manipulate. I stared at the card, then back at him. This was the precipice. I had two choices. Go back to being the frightened, betrayed victim, fighting a losing legal battle for scraps and custody, or accept the protection of the dark world I had fled, and turn the tables. The memory of the silent, celebratory toast they shared over my bleeding body on the cold marble surged forward, freezing the last remnants of my naive compassion. I saw Thomas's satisfaction, Diane's triumphant serenity. They felt safe. They felt invincible. They will pay, I whispered, the words flat and hard, stripped of emotion. Alexei didn't smile, but a glint of deep understanding sparked in his eyes. Yes, they will. But we need a plan. A coordinated, ruthless campaign. You need to tell me everything you know about their finances, their contacts, and especially that second phone. I sat up slightly, ignoring the pull of the stitches and the doctor's orders. The pain was still there. A constant reminder of their betrayal, but it no longer terrified me. It energized me. The tears had evaporated, replaced by a cold surgical clarity. The name of the file was Adonis Life. I began, recounting the details of the wire transfers, the offshore accounts, and the corporate fraud. As I spoke, the victim that was Elena Rostova bled away, leaving behind a hard shell of purpose. I realized I was done seeking justice from a system Thomas had already bought. I wasn't going to beg for my life back. I was going to dismantle theirs piece by piece. When I finished, Alexei leaned back, a flicker of professional respect crossing his features. Good. You are a natural strategist, Elena. You hid the USB drive? It's secured, I confirmed. In a safe deposit box downtown. They don't know I kept it. Excellent, he affirmed. He stood up, towering over the bed, suddenly transforming from my savior into my commander. The first order of business is your security. You will stay here until you are well enough to travel. Then, you disappear. You become invisible to Thomas and his mother. You don't exist until we are ready for you to re-emerge. I looked at the window, which showed not the city lights, but the endless dark night. My fairy tale was over. The lie had been shattered by the cold click of the deadbolt. I met Alexa's intense gaze. Tell me what you need, Alexa. Tell me the rules of your world. I am ready to learn. The first rule is simple, he replied, his voice low and binding. In my world, there is no sentiment, only execution. Can you do that? Can you watch their world burn without flinching? I thought of the warm dark stain on the marble, the triumphant smile on Diane's lips. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I replied, my voice steady. I was preparing for war. The clinic was replaced by a concrete, steel, and glass fortress high above the city, Alexa's primary command center. I was moved late one night, wrapped in layers of blankets, shielded from the outside world as effectively as a military asset in transit. This was not the opulent, fragile perfection of the Adonis house. This was efficiency. The air smelled of ozone and high-end servers, and the silence was deep, protective, and earned. I spent the next 2 weeks recovering physically, but mentally, I was already immersed in the war room. Alex didn't keep me sequestered. He integrated me. My new base of operations was a vast loft dominated by holographic screens and blinking data arrays, staffed by a small, hyper-efficient team of analysts, hackers, and security experts, the Vulov solutions that ran deeper than I had ever imagined. I sat with Alexei, the USB drive retrieved from the safe deposit box resting between us. It was the last physical link to my life with Thomas, and it felt like holding a live grenade. This is not a social exercise, Elena, Alex reminded me on the first day, his voice clinical as he gestured to his lead analyst, a wiry man named Vanya, who stared unblinkingly at cascading lines of code. We are looking for evidence, not motive. The law cares about transactions, not feelings. I nodded. The lack of sentiment exactly what I needed. Feelings had almost killed me. Vanya, working with blinding speed, quickly authenticated the forged documents and the psychiatric referral, but it was the data from Thomas's second phone, the encrypted PDF outlining offshore transfers and corporate dealings that demanded their full attention. Adonis Capital is a phantom, Vanya announced after 3 days of continuous decryption, circling complex web structures on the massive screen. The VC investment firm is merely the shell. The real activity is the continuous flow of high-value, dark money into layered shell corporations across the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Singapore. Money laundering, then, I stated, feeling a chilling certainty settle over me. Scale was astronomical, billions, not millions. Alex leaned in, his expression grim. That is the conclusion, yes. But the question is, for whom? And to conceal what? The next breakthrough was agonizingly slow, requiring Vanya to exploit a flaw in the financial tracking software Thomas used, effectively planting a digital listening post inside Adonis Capital's servers. When the results came back, they were profoundly darker than simple white-collar crime. Vanya isolated a pattern. The wire transfers were timed precisely with specific shipping manifests registered to an obscure shipping entity controlled by Thomas's Cayman account. These manifests detailed shipments of complex industrial chemicals, acetone, precursor compounds, shipped through routes that should have never been financially viable for legitimate industrial use. They're not moving money for the mob, Elena, Alex said, pointing to the chemical names, his amber eyes locked on mine. They are financing the manufacturing itself. My mouth was dry. Manufacturing what? Synthetic narcotics, Alex supplied, the word dropping into the air like a hammer blow. High-grade, international trafficking. Thomas and Diane weren't just running a fraud scheme. They were the financial backbone for a major international drug syndicate, leveraging the veneer of Adonis Capital to move the capital and the precursors globally. The shock was a physical slap. The man who lectured me about the proper vintage of wine and the necessity of good optics was financing the destruction of countless lives through poison. The polished marble steps of the Greenwich House were not stained by my blood alone. They were built on the suffering of the truly desperate. This elevated the crime from betrayal to pure depravity. My pain was secondary to the potential exposure of their empire. The motive, I whispered, staring at the screen, wasn't just to get rid of a troublesome wife. It was to secure the operation. Alex confirmed my terrible realization. Exactly. We found references to an ancient, obscure family trust, a dynastic stipend tied to Thomas's grandmother. It contains vast protected assets. The caveat? The trust only fully vests upon the birth of a direct male heir. Or, failing that, upon the establishment of a clear succession line, meaning a stable, recognized family unit with a legally acknowledged child. They needed the idea of a child to unlock the deepest layers of their criminal funding assets, tied to the original, decades-old establishment of the syndicate. But once the baby was confirmed female, and I became a threat to expose them, I trailed off, the puzzle pieces clicking into a gruesome whole. The baby was initially a tool, I was the convenient vessel. When the tool proved imperfect, a daughter instead of a son, though Alex's team was still digging into the exact clauses, and the vessel proved too inquisitive, both were deemed expendable. They calculated that losing the child and framing you for institutionalization was a cleaner way to secure the trust's main assets, which they were already utilizing illegally, than risking exposure through divorce or a prolonged custody battle, Alex concluded. My rage wasn't hot. It was glacial. They hadn't tried to hurt me out of passion or desperation. They had tried to erase me, as they would erase a clerical error that threatened the balance sheet. With the true nature of their crime exposed, our focus shifted from survival to evidence building. We weren't just gathering information for a civil suit. We were building a federal indictment. The FBI doesn't care about a husband pushing his wife, Elena, Alex explained, circling the key financial figures. They care about organized crime, money laundering, and international narcotics. We must compile an unassailable dossier that links Thomas Adonis and Diane to these specific transactions, bypassing their layers of corporate protection. My role was crucial. I provided the human context, the security codes for the smart home, the location of the safe, Thomas's routine, the names of the few staff members Diane trusted, and the exact physical location where Thomas kept his private encryption keys, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his study. We will plant digital ghosts in their system, Vanya informed me, his fingers flying across the keyboard. They will be subtle backdoors that allow us to continue monitoring their panic, and we will collect forensic copies of all communications. They think they are safe because they have the physical house. We will show them that the house itself is listening. Alex had already initiated the first subtle movements, deploying small, highly skilled teams to begin the physical surveillance of Thomas and Diane's known associates. The war had begun. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of data packets crossing oceans. The preparation is complete, Elena, Alex said finally, closing the encryption analysis file. The evidence is overwhelming. Now, we execute the plan. The first domino must fall where it hurts them most. Their wallet. He handed me a printout, a 5-step plan for total eradication. The first line, highlighted in stark red, read, Phase 1, Financial Ruin. Immediate activation of anonymous tips to SEC, IRS. I took a deep breath, the cold rage sharpening my resolve. I had spent 2 years perfecting the art of being the perfect accessory. Now, I would perfect the art of the perfect annihilation. I placed my finger on the highlighted red text of the printout. This was not a weapon. It was a detonation sequence. Alex gave a brief, sharp nod to Vanya, his lead analyst. The wiry man didn't hesitate. With a few rapid keystrokes, the first domino fell. Vanya's screen, a cascading waterfall of complex code, lit up with confirmation codes not of a successful hack, but of the successful delivery of untraceable, forensic-level evidence. We had anonymously pinged the SEC and the IRS with meticulously compiled evidence of anomalies concerning Adonis Capital's recent quarterly reports and their layered offshore subsidiaries. The beauty of the strategy was the timing. The initial contact was made precisely at the start of federal audit season, when regulators were hungry for low-hanging, high-value fruit. The effect was not instantaneous, but it was mathematically certain. The federal bureaucracy moves slowly, but when it moves, it crushes everything in its path. Within 48 hours, Vanya detected the countermeasures. Thomas's legal and accounting teams activated a sudden, panicky effort to shore up the digital walls. Too late, the SEC had already quietly issued subpoenas for records, freezing Thomas's primary discretionary accounts linked to the firm. By the third day, the first signs of real internal panic emerged. The surveillance feed, carefully rerouted from the smart home security system, showed Thomas pacing his study, the same room where he had confessed his betrayal. He was shouting into a phone, his voice too high. Strained. Rejected? How can the Cyprus transfer be rejected? It's crucial for the shipment schedule. I watched the live stream from the comfort of Alexa's secure loft. The screen muted to a low hum, the sight of Thomas's desperation fueling a cold, deep satisfaction. The man who valued meticulous control above all else was watching his systems fail. The financial arteries that supported his criminal enterprise, slowly clotting. Phase 1 is locked, Elena, Alex confirmed, his gaze fixed on the digital maps showing the freezing process. The money stops flowing. The foundation of Adonis Capital is currently under quarantine. Now, Phase 2. Phase 2, the reputational collapse, was my favorite. It was designed to strike with the speed and virulence of a market crash, ensuring that while the FBI was building its case, Thomas and Diane would be socially and professionally ostracized. We released an exquisitely crafted, supposedly accidental internal memo to 3 major financial blogs known for their aggressive, sensational coverage. The memo didn't mention narcotics or organized crime. It merely highlighted unethical risk management practices, undisclosed related party transactions with shell companies, and an over-reliance on unstable foreign capital. The financial market is built entirely on confidence, and we had just introduced a highly contagious virus of doubt. The reaction was volcanic. By noon, the articles exploded across the financial web, framed with sensational headlines like Adonis Capital, Too Good to Be True, and concerns mount over VC, Titan's opaque offshore holdings. The articles were verifiable enough to be taken seriously, but vague enough to be interpreted as devastating. They didn't allege crime, only institutional instability. But in the world of venture capital, instability is death. Investors demand safety, and the smell of panic travels faster than light. I watched the second surveillance feed. The Adonis Capital boardroom. Thomas was leading an emergency meeting, but his usual aura of composed authority was shredded. The partners, wealthy men who had once worshipped him, were now staring at their phones, their expressions ranging from shock to open fury. "It's a baseless rumor. Market manipulation," Thomas bellowed, slamming his fist on the antique mahogany table. A senior partner, whose fund was heavily invested in Thomas's latest now-frozen venture, stood up, his face purple. "Baseless? The SEC just locked my private capital, Thomas. We need transparency, now. What the hell is offshore? And why is the IRS suddenly interested in your mother's consulting fees?" Within the hour, 2 non-executive directors resigned, citing irreconcilable differences regarding ethical oversight. By the close of trading, the main fund had hemorrhaged 23% of its value, and the calls for Thomas's resignation were pouring in. The best part of Phase 2, however, was the resulting internal civil war at the Greenwich House. Thomas returned home early that evening, his Armani suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. He didn't look like the successful CEO, he looked like a cornered animal. Diane was waiting for him in the living room, holding a glass of white wine with a hand that trembled slightly, a rare, telling sign of her own cracking composure. "It's the press, Thomas," she hissed, gesturing at the financial news scrolling across the massive television screen. "They're linking the Cyprus transfers directly to my name. My reputation. This is worse than a mere audit. This is malice." "Malice? It's your damn structure, mother," Thomas screamed, his voice laced with the metallic tang of real fear. He paced violently, his movements scattering the expensive silk throw rugs. "You insisted on those overly complex shell corporations to hide the stipend assets. Now, thanks to your maternal oversight, the entire firm is going to collapse, and we'll both be answering questions that have nothing to do with market fraud." I watched the scene on the screen, feeling nothing but a cool, detached, clinical satisfaction. The gold light of the chandelier still cast a warm glow, but the silence of the house, which had once felt like suffocating perfection, was now a cage of echoing blame. They had built their entire existence on mutual exploitation and criminal codependence. The moment the money stopped, their loyalty evaporated entirely. "Don't you dare blame me," Diane snapped, taking a defiant sip of wine. "I managed the risk. You were the one who brought a messy, unprofessional liability into the house, who couldn't even handle a simple wife without getting emotional and leaving evidence." She was referring to the initial physical assault, the moment she had discarded me like trash. The casualness of her cruelty, even in panic, was breathtaking. Thomas took 2 aggressive steps towards her. "If you hadn't been so eager to grab the stipend assets, we wouldn't have had to rush the succession plan, and I wouldn't have needed that amateur Russian girl for optics in the first place." Diane's eyes, usually calculating chips of ice, widened in outrage. She hurled her wine glass against the marble fireplace. It shattered with a sharp, decisive crack, the sound ironically similar to the deadbolt that had slammed my life shut. "She was your mistake, Thomas. And now her little orphan protector is systematically destroying every pillar we built. Can't you see? This isn't random. Someone is targeting us." She was finally realizing it. but the realization was wrapped in hysteria. Alex, watching beside me, smiled faintly, the first expression of true pleasure I had seen from him since the night of the rescue. "They are perfectly positioned for the next phase, Elena," he murmured. "They are distracted, desperate, and already turning on each other. Their hubris is our greatest ally. They assume we are a nameless market force, not the consequences of their own actions. They believe I'm gone," I replied, my voice steady. "They believe I am institutionalized. Or perhaps dead. They cannot fathom that the accessory they discarded is now orchestrating the end of their world." I leaned closer to the screen, focusing on the dark silhouette of Thomas as he began shouting at his mother about the need to liquidate overseas assets immediately, a desperate, illegal move that Vanya was already prepared to intercept and record. They thought the storm was an act of God. We were about to show them it was merely a single raindrop in the coming flood. I watched them in their pristine prison, reveling in their fear, and found that the cold clarity was not exhaustion or numbness, it was power. It was the only way to truly survive. The next step was not about data packets or remote tips. It required me to re-enter the lie, to face the physical space that had almost consumed me. "Phase 3, Alex stated, tracing a map of the Greenwich Manor on the holographic display, which glowed eerily blue in the dark loft. "Retrieval of the hard copies. We have the digital proof of the money laundering and the precursor purchases, but to tie Diane directly to the international transfers and to accelerate the indictment, we need the physical paperwork she kept separate from Thomas's main files." I knew exactly where those papers were. Diane trusted no one, least of all her son. Her records of the dynastic stipend assets and their criminal allocation were stored in an ironclad safe hidden behind the painting of her deceased husband in the drawing room. Her whispering into a private phone call months before, "I can get them," I said, the words surprising even myself with their steadiness. "I am still legally his wife. I can claim I'm going back to gather personal effects." Alexei hesitated. His amber eyes narrowed. "It is too risky, Elena. They are paranoid and volatile. We can send a team in." "No," I insisted, shaking my head. "If your team goes in, they leave forensic evidence of a break-in, which Thomas can leverage against us. If I go in, it's a marital dispute, perfectly covered by the chaos we've already created. Besides," I added, a sharp edge entering my voice, "I need to look them in the eye one more time, before I destroy them." Alex gave a slow nod, recognizing the necessity of the risk and the depth of my resolve. "Very well. But you go in fully protected. Vanya will disable all internal security for a 30-minute window. You will wear a discreet audio transmitter and a personal distress beacon. If anything goes wrong, my extraction team is 5 minutes away, regardless of the consequences." The return to Greenwich was surreal. It was a cold, bright afternoon, contrasting sharply with the night of the storm. Alex drove me himself, stopping half a mile away, where I transferred to an unmarked sedan, driven by a woman named Kira, Alex's head of field operations, who handed me a small, perfectly legal-looking box of items from my old life, a few cherished books, a small locket, to sell the ruse. Kira waited 2 houses down, monitoring the radio silence. The exterior of the Adonis house looked unchanged, impassive, gleaming, a monument to the perfect lie. I walked up the marble steps where I had nearly died, the surface now clean, the memory of the dark stain wiped away, though the chill of the stones seeped into my shoes. I didn't ring the bell. I used my old access code. The lock clicked open, not with the brutal finality of the deadbolt, but with a mechanical sigh. Inside, the house smelled stale, not of expensive linen and flowers, but of fear and unwashed worry. Thomas was in the study, and Diane was in the conservatory, both on frantic phone calls, managing the fallout of phases 1 and 2. They hadn't heard me enter. I moved through the hallways with the eerie competence of a ghost, who knew every shadow. I went directly to the drawing room. The heavy gold-framed painting was still there. My hands, though slightly trembling, were precise. I gently slid the painting aside. The dark steel of the safe was revealed. I knelt, ignoring the distant tremor of anxiety in my stomach, and input the code. The tumblers clicked softly. Success. I opened the heavy door and reached inside, bypassing the jewelry and a small, illegal stash of cash. Deep in the back, wrapped in acid-free paper, was a ledger. Diane's meticulous handwritten accounting of every black market dollar transferred from Adonis Capital to the offshore chemical suppliers, and her direct instructions to the Cyprus shell companies. This was the final, unassailable link between the financial wizardry and the synthetic narcotics trade. I tucked the ledger into my internal coat pocket. Just as I stood up, adjusting the painting, I heard Thomas's voice, sharp and dangerously close. "Mother, they've seized the London flat. We need to consolidate. Has anyone contacted Elena?" I froze. I was running out of time. I moved quickly, slipping out of the drawing room and heading toward the back exit. As I passed the study, the door flew open. Thomas saw me. His eyes, sunken and shadowed from lack of sleep and relentless pressure, registered shock, then blinding rage. "You!" he spat, taking a step toward me. "How dare you come back here? Did Alex send you? Did he think he could just waltz in and—" I didn't flinch. I held the box of personal effects closer to my chest, my face carefully blank. I was playing the victim one last time. "I only came for my books, Thomas. I didn't want a scene. Just tell me where I can drop off the divorce papers." The mention of divorce papers, though meaningless to the federal indictment we were building, still hit a nerve. He needed to believe I was still operating on his level, the level of petty civil litigation, not federal conspiracy. He forced a chilling, artificial calm. "Divorce? Don't be absurd, Elena. We can still fix this. We are a family. This is all Alex is doing. Pushing you into this nonsense. Look at what he's done to the firm. He's trying to ruin us." This was it, the moment for phase 4. I allowed a flicker of vulnerability to cross my expression, just enough to be convincing. "I'm scared, Thomas. I don't know what to do. I'm living in a stranger's apartment. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I have no money." His predatory instincts immediately switched back on, overriding his panic. He saw weakness, and he saw opportunity. "Come inside," he murmured, his voice softening, attempting the old seductive charm. "Come back to the bedroom. We can talk about this like rational adults. We can tell the lawyers Alex misled you. Come home, Elena. Let me protect you from the storm." I made my final, calculated move. "I can't do this here." "Not when Diane is so angry," I whispered, looking down. "But I need to talk. I need safety. Can we meet? Just us. Tomorrow evening. I need to understand what happened. I need to know if there is anything left of the man I married." Thomas didn't hesitate. He was desperate to regain control. Desperate to believe he could still manipulate the amateur Russian girl back into her box and, perhaps, use me to lure Alexei into a trap. "The house. Tomorrow night. 7 o'clock, he commanded, his relief palpable. "I will tell Diane I need the house for a client dinner. Don't tell anyone. Don't bring Alexei. If you bring Alex, I won't talk to you. Just you and me," I confirmed, managing a shaky, exhausted smile. 7 o'clock. I turned and walked out, not looking back at the house until I reached Kira's waiting car. The drive back to the loft was a silent celebration. Thomas took the bait, I informed Alex, handing him the handwritten ledger as soon as I walked through the door. He glanced at the ledger, then at me. "You did well, Commander." The final 24 hours were meticulous preparation. Vanya and his team used the time to analyze the physical ledger, confirming its evidentiary power, and then to completely wire the Greenwich house. Every room, every corridor, every decorative plant received a microphone and a high-definition camera feed, all linked to a temporary FBI command post established discreetly down the street. The bureau agents were eager. The evidence of organized crime, drug financing, and high-level corporate fraud was compelling. My testimony, backed by Alexa's forensic data and Diane's ledger, was the final piece. They only needed the opportunity to catch Thomas and Diane discussing the crimes, confirming their intent, and then executing the raid to secure the remaining physical evidence. As the clock ticked towards 7 p.m., I prepared myself in Alexa's private suite. This was not a dressing ritual. It was armor plating. I stood before the full-length mirror, no longer seeing the fragile, terrified woman who had been left bleeding on the porch. I saw the strategist. My pregnancy was advanced now. Prominent. A visible symbol of the life I had fought to save, and the future I was building. I didn't choose black for the revenge, or red for the drama. I chose white. The suit Alexa's tailor had prepared was pristine, stark white Italian crepe, cut precisely to accommodate my changed figure, sharp at the shoulders, clean and unblemished. I pulled my hair back into a sleek tight knot, removing all traces of softness. The contrast was deliberate. White innocence confronting their entrenched darkness. Alexei walked in just as I slipped on the final piece, a pair of elegant, low heels. He wasn't wearing his usual tactical gear, but a bespoke dark suit, looking every inch the silent, lethal partner. "You look like you are going to a coronation," he observed, his voice low. "It is better than a funeral," I replied, turning to face him. "This is the last time they will see the woman Thomas thought he married. She is wearing white because she is finally clean of their filth." He approached, his eyes intense. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a physical force. "We have been over the script. You go in first. You let them talk. You play the confusion. You let them admit to the planning. You do not mention the FBI until I give the signal. Once you are out, the chaos is mine." "I understand the parameters," I confirmed. "I am the lure, Alex. The one they dismissed. They will underestimate me." He reached out and adjusted the lapel of my white jacket. A rare, small gesture of protective focus. "The distress beacon will be in your shoe. You will be out within 10 minutes of entering. No deviation. This is not about winning an argument. It is about providing the final, necessary audio confirmation for the warrant." I nodded, my composure absolute. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, thrilling certainty. They had believed their victory was secured the moment that deadbolt clicked. Tonight, I was returning to that very spot to watch the walls of their prison fall down. "Let's go show them what happens when the accessory fights back," I said, and walked towards the waiting elevator, ready to deliver the final, devastating act of justice. The hour of reckoning had arrived. The sedan dropped me exactly 2 houses away. The air was crisp, carrying the distant, clean scent of the coming winter. I walked the short distance, the white crepe suit making a silent statement against the encroaching suburban darkness. The marble steps were dry tonight, but the memory of the freezing, sticky pain was a phantom ache that served only to sharpen my focus. I used my code one last time. The lock clicked, and I stepped into the foyer. Thomas was waiting, but he wasn't alone. Diane stood beside him, clutching a velvet handbag, her face a mask of practiced displeasure. So much for his client dinner. They were waiting as a unit, ready to tag team the vulnerable wife. Thomas tried to smile, the effort falling short, revealing the stress lines around his eyes. "Elena, you came. I'm glad you listened to reason." His eyes scanned my body, lingering on the pregnancy, then the clean, expensive lines of the white suit. He looked confused. "We didn't expect white," Diane observed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It's a bit severe for a private meeting." I stepped onto the polished parquet floor, every movement measured, the distress beacon in my shoe humming subtly. I didn't acknowledge their comments. "You said you wanted to talk about a settlement," I stated, keeping my voice low and brittle, selling the final remnants of the victim role. "I need to understand why you did this to me." Thomas gestured toward the living room, the scene of their previous triumphant toast. "In here. We can be comfortable." I walked past the spot where I had been thrown, and sat deliberately on the edge of the large cream sofa. They remained standing, attempting to loom over me. "It's very simple, Elena," Thomas began, moving into his practiced calm CEO voice. "Alex is manipulating you. He is using you to attack my firm out of resentment. We can stop the SEC audit if you simply confirm you were coerced into planting that information." Diane leaned forward, her voice a poisonous whisper. "And the baby, dear? We can forgive the childish tantrum and the stress-induced bleeding. Come home. Don't force Thomas to initiate the psychiatric confinement. We are offering you a clean way out." I looked up at them, my expression hardening, stripping away the vulnerability like shedding old skin. "The psychiatric confinement," I repeated, testing the words. "The one you fabricated using a forged doctor's note 2 weeks after I told you I was pregnant?" Thomas's face went stiff. "How did you, and the legal contingency file?" I cut him off, my voice steady, gaining momentum. "The one where you meticulously laid out the plan to declare me an unfit mother and seize control of our child upon birth." I watched the sudden dawning terror in their eyes. They realized this wasn't about divorce papers. This was about exposure. That was privilege, Elena. Legal maneuvering? Thomas desperately tried to recover. "No, Thomas. That was cruelty," I corrected him, "but it wasn't the crime. It was merely the packaging." I reached inside the impeccable white suit jacket and pulled out the small, black, leather-bound book, Diane's ledger, and placed it gently on the pristine glass coffee table. Diane gasped, a high, thin sound that cut through the silence. She instinctively reached for it. "Don't touch it, Diane," I warned, my voice flat. "It's protected. That ledger contains the final, handwritten proof of every dollar laundered through Adonis Capital. It details the offshore transfers used to purchase the chemical precursors for your synthetic narcotics operation." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Thomas's jaw dropped. Diane stumbled back, knocking a vase slightly off balance. "We knew you were cheating, Thomas. We knew you were committing corporate fraud. But we did not know you were financing a global drug syndicate," I continued, rising slowly to my feet, my white suit looming over them. "You were willing to let me die, let my child die, just to secure that archaic dynastic stipend tied to your criminal enterprise. You threw me out onto the cold marble, bleeding, and then you toasted your victory." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy, savoring the moment of absolute power. "I am not here to beg for my life back," I stated, looking Diane straight in the eye. "I am here to tell you I orchestrated the SEC and IRS audits. I fed the information to the financial blogs. I am the reason you are financially ruined, reputationally destroyed, and why the assets for the next shipment are completely frozen." Thomas finally found his voice, a raw, furious shriek. "You bitch! Alexei put you up to this. You think you can—" "I did it, Thomas. Alex merely provided the tools. I was the strategist." I finished, my voice utterly devoid of emotion. "And I didn't come alone tonight." As if on cue, a loud, sharp tone echoed in my earpiece, Alexa's signal. "Go." I took 2 steps back toward the entrance, putting distance between myself and their fury. "This house is compromised," I announced, the finality in my voice unmistakable. "Every word you have spoken tonight has been recorded and transmitted to the federal authorities. Your theatrical performance is over." The front door, the one that had been slammed shut on my life, burst inward with terrifying force. The foyer immediately filled with the dark forms of FBI agents, shields raised, weapons drawn. Their presence an overwhelming wave of cold, official power. The air was ripped apart by the commanding shout, "Federal Bureau of Investigation! Put your hands where we can see them. You are under arrest." Thomas let out a choked sound, his rage instantly dissolving into pathetic terror. He tried to scramble for the back door, but 2 agents moved with blurring speed, slamming him against the mahogany wall. Diane stood frozen, her face pale, the pearl necklace rising and falling rapidly on her chest. She looked around the gilded room, the stage of her life, and saw only destruction. I stood motionless, the only calm point in the sudden, shattering chaos. The agents ignored me, focusing entirely on the targets. Thomas Adonis, you are under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to traffic controlled substances, the lead agent recited, the words sharp and absolute. As Thomas was cuffed, struggling and yelling incoherently about his lawyers, Diane was finally forced to move. She watched her son being brutalized, and the realization hit her. The perfection was over. The game was lost. An agent approached Diane, forcing her hands behind her back. Diane, you are also under arrest for conspiracy and fraud. She didn't scream for Thomas, she screamed at me. You did this! She shrieked, her voice raw with disbelief and hatred, her face contorted into something ugly and monstrous. You were nothing, an accessory. You will pay for this. I walked slowly towards her, until only a few feet separated my pristine white suit from her raging, defeated face. I looked down at her hands as the cold metal snapped into place around her wrists. The sound loud and final in the once silent house. No, Diane, I replied, my voice a quiet whisper, audible only to her over the noise of the arrest. I already paid. I paid on the marble steps, in the rain. This is merely the receipt. I turned my back on the chaos, the flashing lights, the shouting agents, the shattered remnants of the Adonis life. I walked out the broken front door, leaving the wreckage behind me. Alex was waiting for me outside, standing beside the unmarked sedan Kira was driving. He didn't look triumphant. He looked relieved. He opened the car door. I stepped over the threshold, moving away from the golden light of the Adonis house, which now seemed only to illuminate the truth of their depravity. As the car pulled away, I glanced back at the house, watching the agents lead Thomas and Diane into separate, unmarked vehicles. The sight of Diane, struggling against the cuffs, her composure finally evaporated into hysteria, was the final punctuation mark on my revenge. Alex reached across the console and placed his hand, warm and heavy, over mine, which rested protectively on my stomach. It's done, Elena, he confirmed. I didn't look at him. I looked forward, through the windshield, toward the city lights, and the promise of a future built not on lies, but on hard-won survival. It is finished, I agreed. The weight of the past 2 years, the fear, the pain, the deception, lifted in that moment, replaced by the profound, quiet safety of my new chosen family. The ride back to Alexa's secure estate was silent. The hum of the powerful engine a soothing counterpoint to the distant wail of sirens that were no longer chasing me. I didn't look at Thomas and Diane's ruined house again. I had secured my receipt. The transaction was finalized. In the ensuing weeks, the machinery of justice, once set in motion, performed its relentless, crushing duty. The Adonis name became synonymous not with venture capital success, but with federal indictment and international criminal conspiracy. Vanya, Alexa's analyst, ensured the media received a steady, curated stream of verifiable, damning details, forcing the story to remain front-page news. The charges were far worse than Thomas and Diane could have ever imagined. The drug trafficking and money laundering charges, fueled by the evidence from Diane's ledger, carried serious federal weight, bypassing any high-priced corporate defense they might have attempted. The evidence of their plot to institutionalize me and the medical reports detailing the fetal distress and trauma I suffered were secondary, but they ensured that no plea deal would grant them leniency. I gave my testimony remotely, my voice steady and cold, recounting the betrayal, the forgery, and the final, brutal assault. I testified not as a wronged wife, but as a witness to organized crime. I never saw Thomas or Diane again, but the news reports showed their faces. Thomas, hollow-eyed and rapidly aging in the mugshot. Diane stripped of her composure, her expensive suits replaced by prison jumpsuits. 6 months after the night of the storm, Thomas Adonis received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy and fraud. Diane, deemed the financial architect of the deeper criminal enterprise, received 30 years. The Adonis kingdom was not just gone, it was erased. its assets seized to fund anti-narcotics efforts. They would die in prison, stripped of every luxury they had ever used to mask their depravity. With the legal storm receding, the focus shifted entirely to my recovery and my future. Alexei moved me out of the high-tech loft and into a sprawling, quiet estate deep in the Massachusetts countryside. This wasn't a temporary safe house. It was a fortress disguised as a home, ringed by discreet, state-of-the-art security systems, and shielded by acres of dense forest. Here, the silence was protective, not suffocating. I spent my days walking the grounds, listening to the natural sounds, slowly allowing the tension to leach from my body. I no longer walked the halls of a museum. I walked the rooms of a sanctuary. My relationship with Alexei changed dramatically in this piece. He had been my savior and my commander, but now, he was simply the anchor in my life. He never asked about my trauma, but he saw it. He didn't try to control my movements or my decisions. He provided resources and respect. If I wanted to hire a financial advisor, he provided the list. If I needed a safe way to contact an old friend, his team facilitated it. There was no ownership, only fierce, unbreakable loyalty. He was the dark guardian angel who didn't demand payment in subservience, only in trust. I slowly understood the difference between Thomas's gilded cage and Alexei's secure harbor. Thomas offered the illusion of safety through rigid control, making me dependent on his perfect image. Alexei offered actual safety, built on shared truth, respecting my autonomy while standing ready to dismantle any threat that came near. I finally learned what true love and protection felt like, not a contract, but a bond forged in shared fire. As the leaves turned gold and then fell away, preparing the world for winter, I prepared for the birth. The delivery was scheduled for the quiet, cold morning of Christmas Eve. Alexei was beside me, not flinching at the pain or the raw reality of the labor, holding my hand with a grip that was warm and utterly steady. His presence was a bulwark against the world, and against the lingering fear that the child I had fought so desperately to save would not make it. When she arrived, she didn't cry immediately. She was small, perfect, and silent, resting on my chest. Her skin was warm, her tiny fingers curling around mine. I looked at her, and the last of the ice around my heart melted away. She was not a complication, a liability, or a weapon. She was a miracle, a fierce, tiny human who had fought the storm and won. "She is magnificent, Elena," Alexei whispered, his voice thick with emotion, a rare crack in his formidable exterior. He looked down at the child he had risked everything to protect. I stroked her cheek, my eyes filling with tears of profound relief and triumph. "Natasha," I murmured, the name feeling right, solid, born on Christmas, a new beginning. She opened her eyes then. They were the color of molten amber, exactly like Alexei's. Natasha grew quickly, filling the quiet estate with the sound of pure, innocent life. Her existence was the final, irrefutable proof that I had won. Thomas and Diane had attempted to eliminate the problem, but the problem had grown roots and blossomed into life in the very sanctuary they could never breach. I never forgot the cost of my naivete, or the cold click of that deadbolt, but those memories no longer controlled me. They were footnotes in the story of my survival. My life was now simple, profoundly safe, and undeniably real. I had my daughter, my warrior. I had Alex, my constant, unwavering guardian. The man who understood that sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to ensure the enemy who caused it is utterly destroyed. I had chased a fairy tale built on control and lies. I found a reality built on loyalty and truth. Looking out over the snow-covered grounds, watching Alex carrying Natasha on his shoulders, pointing out the deer in the distance, I smiled a genuine, deep smile that reached my eyes. I wasn't Elena Rostova, the victim. I wasn't Elena Adonis, the accessory. I was Elena, the mother, the survivor, the strategist, safe in the embrace of my chosen family. And the storm was finally, truly over.